Video game usage can influence and be influenced by personality traits and developmental factors. A deeper understanding into video game use and the effect it has on the development of various psychological aspects could be important in understanding social interactions and help us to improve individual wellness. Games are being widely accessed and readily consumed by adolescents who are eager to use the newest technology and parents who would like positive alternatives to the commonly available games. There are, of course, other demographics in society to consider too. The effects of video games on the development of children, adolescents and adults needs exploration. This presentation aims to find some conclusions to how video games affect the development of social anxiety, stress and empathy. Relationship between video games and the development of social anxiety and social stress. My aims are to explore the correlations and potential influences that video game usage can have on people's social anxiety and stress levels. Do models like the 5-factor theory identify personality traits which would be more susceptible to online gaming addiction? Does online gaming addiction cause a higher rate of social anxiety and stress? And do online relationships with other gamers and avatars influence social interactions? Some definitions to consider before we begin. Anxiety, a state of apprehension, tension and worry. A common problem usually starting with early adolescence. This can improve with age, however for many, it remains throughout life. Social anxiety disorder, extreme insecurity in social situations accompanied by an exaggerated fear of embarrassing oneself. There is a small subgroup of people who actually develop the condition later in life. The 5-factor theory perspective is categorized into 5 personality traits. Neuroticism, any one of a variety of mental disorders characterized by significant anxiety or other distressing emotional symptoms, irrational fears, obsessive thoughts, compulsive acts, dissociative states, and somatic and depressive reactions. 2. Sensation seeking, the tendency to search out and engage in thrilling activities as a method of increasing stimulation and arousal. 3. Trait anxiety, proneness to experience anxiety. 4. State anxiety, anxiety in response to a specific situation that is perceived as threatening or dangerous. State anxiety varies in intensity and fluctuates over time. 5. Aggression, behavior aimed at harming others physically or psychologically. It can be distinguished from anger in that anger is oriented at overcoming the target but not necessarily through harm or destruction. Social anxiety and FFT in research. The researcher found that results of a multiple linear regression collected over a 1-month period of 123 university students identified traits from the FFT model were associated with online gaming addiction. The research found significant associations with online gaming addiction. State anxiety and sensation seeking were strong predictors. This is to be expected in university students. Social anxiety and fear of negative evaluation are risk factors for gaming addiction, as it goes hand in hand with an introverted personality. Social anxiety in real-world situations could be diminished when playing online due to not facing other people. These results appear to indicate that personality traits contribute to addiction in online video games. The research found that if game violence, like sensation seeking, is rewarding to players. Due to a lack of experience in these interactions in real-world situations, behavior will be repeated, leading to excessive play. This correlation may be valid, however replications of these findings is needed. The 5-factor theory suggests personality traits can develop well into adulthood, so a sample of older participants could have strengthened findings. ADHD and anxiety. This is the first researcher to study and evaluate relationships between internet addiction and ADHD symptoms. Other variables such as personality traits, depression and anxiety were controlled for here, but like the previous study, no adults were surveyed, which creates a gap in the reliability of the survey. as anxiety, addiction, and ADHD are factors that change throughout the entire life development of a person. Social anxiety could be a consequence of other factors, such as relationship problems, money issues, unemployment, or substance abuse, alcoholism. Furthermore, students with internet addiction took part in this study and were self-selected. This is not a good reflection of all university students, nor the general public as a whole. There are potential ethical issues in this study too, as students with internet addiction could feel stigmatized for being associated with internet addiction, especially in adolescence. ADHD and anxiety amongst adults. As the ADAA describes, adults with ADHD are likely to have an anxiety disorder, depression, bipolar disorder, or other comorbid psychiatric disorder. And this study of adults states that 50% of adults with ADHD also suffer from anxiety disorders. In this study, the researcher conducted an online cross-sectional survey consisting of 23,533 adults. It showed the symptoms of the attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, obsessive compulsive disorder, anxiety and depression could explain addictive use of social media and video games. Similar to Dalbudak Evren, the cross-sectional design prevented any conclusions concerning causality to show significant associations. Addictive use of video games was positively associated with being male and single, lower age, ADHD, OCD, and depression. Although this study included adults, comparisons could now be drawn between adults and younger participants. Being single and with a socially stigmatized condition like ADHD or OCD could push young people who are less developed socially and take peer opinions very seriously to withdraw and find solace in an online fantasy world rather than risk interactions in real life. This should be further investigated using longitudinal study designs with the representative samples. So in conclusion, addictive use of video games was positively associated with being male, single, lower age, ADHD, and inversely related with symptoms of anxiety. These studies will have to be conducted using representative samples and longitudinal designs in this understudied field. Associating with online self. Massively multiplayer online role-playing games bring players together to communicate using avatars. Furthering this association with the fantasy world of online interactions, Sioni et al. Explored relationships between internet gaming disorder symptoms, social phobia, and player avatar identification. Mehroof, Griffiths, and Sioni et al. Seem to have conflicting conclusions on social anxiety. However, there is a congruence with gaming addiction. The positives they found: connecting socially and enhancing self-esteem. Interactions within a fantasy world make people feel less socially anxious. Mehroof, Griffiths. The negatives Sioni et al. Found. For some players, regular usage encourages a dependency, which leads to negative psychosocial and health consequences. There becomes a player avatar identification problem, and social phobia and internet gaming disorder symptoms were strongly positively related. Player avatar empathy is an understandable result for people with ADHD and social anxiety. Cognitive empathy is described as perception of others, and it's more like a skill learned and developed over time and interactions with others. Again, when participants can't or don't get these social interactions in real-world circumstances, and then online interactions satisfy these needs, it is to be expected that they gravitate and become fully engaged in a fantasy world of online video games. The emotional empathy characteristics are feeling the same emotion as another person. Personal distress refers to one's own feelings of distress in response to perceiving another's plight. And feeling compassion for another person is one of the most frequently associated with the study of empathy in psychology. These developmental characteristics could be applied to the relationship between a person and their avatar. The emotional development of self-esteem in these environments could be naturally encouraged due to the lack of opportunity to express such emotions in real-world interactions. Villiers et al. Suggests virtual gaming interactions may satisfy unmet psychological needs. This new bond with a fantasy avatar could easily become addictive, et al. suggests long-term engagement with virtual gaming seems to be what develops the avatar identification issues, and sensation-seeking from the FFT model would result in high levels of gameplay and an over-identification between players and avatars, which, according to Weitz et al., over-identification with an avatar caused undesirable psychological responses. So what can we take from the research? There is a relationship between game addiction and avatar identification, and that there is a positive correlation between the amount of time playing video games and avatar identification. This researcher shows the relationship between playing hours and avatar identification in this chart. ADHD, anxiety and depression are developmental characteristics which can make players more prone to game addiction, as shown in the covered literature. Would such results be replicable when other genres of games are being played? RPGs are very immersive and encourage a close relationship with the on-screen character. Research into different types of games and their corresponding reactions would help to clarify this. So, in conclusion, the research covered showed traits from the FFT are strongly associated with levels of gaming addiction. State anxiety and sensation seeking are strong predictors of online gaming addiction. Sensation seeking can encourage excessive play if rewarding to the players. Developmental emotional characteristics identified in a 5-factor theory seems to show a breakdown of the types of personalities consistent with heavy online gaming. Research showed links between heavy online usage and introverted hyperactive personalities. This high level of online usage from the research explored seems to show a correlation with social anxiety and stress. However, further studies needed to identify any definitive causation between the two, and to exclude extrinsic factors away from the online gaming environment. Links were also discovered between cognitive and social empathy, and a predilection to addictive gameplay when dealing with online avatars. In turn, this leads to empathy for the fantasy avatar and development of social anxiety and stress. Further research needed to identify whether this would occur playing other games other than a role-playing game. Communities in massively multiplayer online role-playing games can be beneficial for developing online social interactions. However, studies show over-identification with an avatar can cause psychological issues if there is a persistent and excessive gameplay. Further questions to explore from the highlighted studies. Research into offline games. Are the effects of social anxiety exacerbated when the online community of gaming is absent? Do MMORPGs improve real-world social interactions like they seem to in the studies for online interactions? And do different online genres have the same effects as the RPGs studied here? Extrinsic factors, particularly in the adults surveyed, could be explored deeper. For example, do other addictions like alcoholism or emotional factors like divorce correlate with gaming addiction and social withdrawal, which could exacerbate social anxiety and social stress? Are cultural and socio-economic factors important?
The effects of video games on empathy development. Empathy is an important aspect of our social abilities and brings several health benefits. Therefore, it is important to understand the impact of new media on individuals. Since video games vary massively and target different audiences and age groups, it is also of importance that game developers understand the different types of empathy and how to design appropriately for their target age group in order to get the best possible outcomes of it. Some research has already studied the different impacts of video games on empathy development. However, a lot of the little research conducted presents different findings, some positive effects, some negative effects. Besides the impact on development, there has also been some interest in research to find out how to induce empathy on individuals through games. However, it is yet unclear how to best achieve this goal, as empathic feelings might correlate with other variables such as education. There are few research gaps and suggested future research in order to understand the impact of video games on empathy development and find an optimized design process for games to effectively improve, sustain, and stimulate further empathy development, as also successfully induce empathetic feelings to reduce prejudice toward stigmatized groups. Desserty and Jackson describe empathy as the ability to understand and respond to other people's emotions and thoughts. The brain parts that are responsible for this ability are located in the network of brain regions also called the social brain, more specifically in the prefrontal cortex, the orbital frontal cortex, and the superior temporal sulcus, circled in red in the picture. Various research has also shown several positive benefits related to empathy, such as better social interactions, higher marital satisfaction, and lower self-rated loneliness. These benefits are part of the reason why it is so important to understand the effect of video games on empathy development. If games can help promote these benefits, then it is important to understand how to support empathy development. However, if games have a negative effect on the development of empathy, then game developers and researchers will need to find how to reduce the negative effect in order to avoid the lack of empathy in our society. To improve designs for target audience, developers need to understand the different types of empathy. In social science research, empathy has been divided into two broad categories known as cognitive and emotional or affective empathy. Cognitive empathy is defined as the experience of intentionally taking another person's point of view, also often referred to as perspective taken, empathic accuracy, emotion recognition, or theory of mind. For example, a person A puts themselves in the position of a person B to get a better understanding to why they feel a certain way, but person A will not feel the same as person B. Emotional or affective empathy is subdivided into parallel and reactive empathy. Parallel empathy is the experience of similar emotions to the other person. For example, when a person sees someone cry and also experiences sadness. Reactive empathy means that a person has an emotional response that is unlike what the other person's experience. For example, while person A feels embarrassed, person B might have a reactive empathic response and feel pity for the person. Eisenberg et al. Also suggests that empathic concern and personal distress lie within affective empathy. Although this model has been studied and referenced numerously times, cognitive and empathy might still trigger an emotional empathy reaction, as once a person understands another, they might feel something in regards to their situation, and therefore both types can overlap in certain situations, making it harder to separate them in research and find appropriate measurements of each. Besides the understanding of difference between cognitive and affective empathy, it is also from importance to understand when we develop certain empathic abilities to design games appropriately to a target age group. Hoffman suggests the existence of 4 stages in empathic development in our lifespan. The first step is global empathy, which occurs with the first year of life. Within this stage, an infant may match strong emotions they observe, such as starting to cry if another infant is crying. The second step is called egocentric empathy and occurs between the 12th and the 18th month of life. Once a child has developed a fairly clear sense of their separate selves and understands that others may or may not have false beliefs, they can respond to another's distress with some distress of their own, and might even attempt to cure the other person's problem by getting their own mother, for example, if another child is hurt. The third step in this development is empathy for another's feelings, which usually starts at the age of 2 and 3 and continues to develop through elementary school. During this step, children start to note others' feelings and partially match those responding to the other's distress in non-egocentric ways. Children also become able to distinguish a wider range of emotions in this stage. The fourth step is the development of empathy for another's life condition. This step usually occurs in late childhood or adolescence. A more generalized notion of others' feelings is developed, and children respond not just to the immediate situation, but are capable of empathizing with other individual general situation. While this theory gives a clear structure to empathy development, it only focuses on development during childhood and early adolescence and does not explore empathy development throughout an entire lifespan, nor does it explain the different development between cognitive and affective empathy. Shin and An, for example, have found that cognitive empathy develops in late adolescence, which suggests that the different types of empathy might follow different development trajectories, and that these stages therefore might not be entirely correct or need further research to achieve a wider knowledge on the matter. Furthermore, it is also hard to research subjective matters with children, as children might not have developed the ability to effectively express their feelings, or they might misunderstand instructions and tests conducted with them. Looking at further empathy development throughout young and late adulthood, evidence can be found that there are more steps than Hoffman suggested. Researchers argue that the development of cognitive affective complexity follows a reversed U-shaped pattern and is positively correlated with measures of cognitive functioning. Since other studies have shown that cognitive empathy is closely related to various cognitive abilities, which decline in age, Labou, Weitz, and Grün also suggest that empathy may show the same U-shaped pattern. Moran has also found that older adults perform more poorly on the theory of mind tasks than young adults. As established earlier, theory of mind is correlated to cognitive empathy, and Moran's findings might therefore support Labou, Weitz, and Grün's suggestions that cognitive empathy declines with age. Sun et al. Have also found that older participants of their study have shown a higher emotional empathy score than younger participants. However, they have also shown age-related deficits in trait and state cognitive empathy, with the latter being positively associated with memory. As games might help to maintain the brain active and train memory, there might be ways to improve and maintain cognitive empathy abilities in late adulthood in non-direct ways. Sun et al. Finding also suggests that emotional and cognitive empathy develop through different trajectories. This research was conducted with Chinese participants only, and the methods were solely through watching videos rather than real social situations, which might take some of the findings' validity away, as they might not be generalized to a wider population. So far, little research has been done to understand how games affect empathy development. However, some first conclusions can be drawn from the existing research. Tsai has found that virtual pet games may be able to help enhance children's empathy development. Children in the study have shown perspective-taking skills by taking their virtual pet's interests and benefits into account when choosing in-game activities. This suggests that children have the ability to develop cognitive empathy earlier than cited in Shin and On, that cognitive development develops in late adolescence. Games might therefore not only affect empathy development, but also help research understand empathy development better by providing new ways to study it. However, Tsai's study did not find any conclusive evidence that the perspective-taking skills would enhance further empathy development. It does suggest that playing with virtual pets offered children more opportunity to train their perspective-taking skills, which is usually most encouraged through social interactions, and might therefore provide alternatives to children who struggle establishing these. However, Tsai's sample size was relatively small, and the research time was only 3 weeks due to ethical concerns that this research would impact on children's academic achievement, with no follow-ups to see if findings were only short-term effects or if they would extend. The questionnaire used in the study was also designed for a different empathy study with real-life pets, making some of the questions irrelevant. Tsai's findings suggest that games may help support empathy development in children. However, a recreated study with adjusted methods, such as an improved questionnaire and a longer time span, is suggested to gather more conclusive findings. While Tsai has found a positive effect on empathy development through games, other researchers have found that games had a negative effect on adolescents, regardless of the game type, with the exception to board games, and no effect at all on adults. However, this study was correlational and not causational, and did not focus on a specific game. Participants were only asked what type of games they would usually play, such as action games or puzzle games, which might explain the different outcome, as game mechanics can vary drastically, even within the same game type. This study was a cross-sectional study, and participants grew up in very different eras, giving a potential explanation to why it had no effect on adults and a negative effect on adolescents. Kroll et al. Found that games specifically designed to improve empathy development did have a positive impact on empathy-related brain functions. The game design for their research used game mechanics that tap into processes underlying empathy, specifically perspective-taking and emotion regulation. It also tested participants through questionnaires and brain activity whilst playing the game. However, the sample size was relatively small, with only 30 participants in each condition, and there is no evidence that the effects are long-term. This finding could change how developers design future games, as new generations spend more time in front of screens, and with this knowledge, game designers could improve their players' life quality in improving empathy development and giving them therefore the benefits that come along with it. Basing on Shin and An and Kroll et al. Study, it becomes clear that game genre and the way games are designed can have a drastic change on the effect of empathy development, suggesting that commercial games might have a neutral or negative impact, and that game developers can make a change and improve development using the findings of existing research in their design process. While there are studies that look at the effect of video games on empathy development, most of them focus on childhood and adolescence, as this age group forms a major concern. Little research looks into the development of empathy related to games and more into how to induce empathy feelings in adults, for various reasons, but mostly to reduce prejudice towards stigmatized groups. Rousseau and DeVideo found that playing a video game that had the goal of creating empathetic feelings towards the poor had no prosocial impact, while watching someone else play had the intended outcome of more empathetic feelings towards the poor. However, Rousseau and DeVideo have measured participants' feelings through questionnaires, which can be very subjective and do not conclude if the game selected activates any brain function related to empathy. They also found that the game actually led to believe that poverty is personally controllable. This suggests that the game developers have not researched how to successfully induce empathy and implement decision-making as their main mechanic, accomplishing the opposite of their goal. However, the researchers have not pointed this out or nor suggested improvement in how to avoid opposite effects of the intended goal. The findings also suggest that games that lead to internal attributions will not induce empathetic concern about stigmatized groups. Games like these can be very critical as the developers claim that they are serious games or games for good, and they are being presented to politicians or other people that make crucial decisions for these stigmatized groups. And by having an opposite effect, these games could actually make situations worse for the stigmatized group. Therefore, there needs to be a stronger link between research and developers in the future so that good intents do not end up bribery. Most of the research conducted in this field focuses more on inducing empathy rather than the effects of games on empathy development in this age group. Corral et al. And Rousseau and DeVidio's findings show evidence that the way games are designed is important to positively induce or improve empathy development. Flanagan and Bellman have conducted a literature review and structured some design principles to foster empathy in players based on what researchers have found about empathy so far. However, these design principles have not been put to practice, and the user's emotional response to design features needs to be tested. This, however, is an important first step into bringing researchers and developers closer by presenting pragmatic steps and design principles on how to successfully design a game to foster empathy. However, Rousseau and DeVideo also found that people high in meritocracy beliefs were less likely to be influenced by the game they played, which would suggest that empathetic concern is related to personal traits and values. In this case, games had to generally change a person's value to induce the empathetic concern developers intended. Flanagan and Bellman should also take these possibilities into account when proposing design principles to foster empathy. If prejudice is a personality trait and based on individual values, the way that games are designed to foster empathy might be very different to Flanagan and Bellman have suggested, and this would require further research. Kampf was able to change the intergroup attitudes of Israeli Jews and Palestinians by having them play an educational awareness-raising game about the Israel-Palestine conflict. This suggests that the educational games might have a more positive impact on empathetic behavior, leading the players to understand the other person. However, this would mainly induce cognitive empathy, and as research suggests, this type of empathy declines with age. By researching how to induce empathy, it also raises some ethical concerns that if an optimized design principle will be found and researchers enable developers to successfully change people's behavior, the knowledge could be misused, trying to control individuals and change their behaviors in a negative and unethical way. The research study in this presentation has shown evidence that cognitive and affective empathy develop in different stages. However, not all researchers take into account the two different types and analyze their findings just regarding general empathy, which may reduce their validity. Games have shown to impact individuals differently depending on their age and the way they have been designed. Future research should focus to differentiate between different mechanics more to get a clear understanding of how to support empathy development the best way possible. Most of the research about adults focuses more on how to induce empathy, but since empathy development takes a reversed U-shape, research should find a way on how to promote further empathy development and prevent empathy from declining with age. Overall findings conclude both positive and negative effects on empathy development. However, a majority of the negative findings were correlational studies and did not find evidence for a clear causation between video games and the negative empathy scores. Researchers should therefore invest in more causational research to get a better understanding of the effects of video games on empathy. There is also a clear gap in research utilizing games that have been designed specifically for this study, as commercial games might not offer the best baseline to test hypotheses established. Besides video games, there might also exist an interest to research the effect of board games, with and without technological elements such as companion apps, on empathy. Researchers found positive and negative effects that video games can have on social anxiety, stress, and empathetic development. However, there is a consistent gap in most research papers about development throughout adulthood and how games affect it. There are also not sufficient studies that show causation between games and development and focus more on correlation without taking other extrinsic factors into consideration. Future research should analyze effects of different genres and mechanics on individual development, but should consider the fact that any new knowledge on how to influence people might result in unethical misuse of the new findings. Overall, games may offer positive ways to improve development and individual well-being if researchers help game developers find optimized design principles.
We had positive discussions and good initial planning of the roles we would take in the presentation. During the process of compiling research and meeting to provide feedback, I feel I could have been more available for meetings to integrate our findings. This is something I've been guilty of before. I often work independently and don't make myself available enough for constructive feedback. It's something that has become apparent to me during this process, and I'll be aware of from now on. However, the problems I personally encountered were due to my little experience with compiling research. I found it hard to focus on specific points and expand the literature to support my points. I could have spent more time critiquing the research and integrating existing ideas in the existing literature. From now on, I will concentrate on compiling relevant research and developing a more detailed overview for my presentation, before starting the analysis of research papers. I have tended to go off on tangents away from the original focus in the past when writing essays or giving presentations, and I feel I tended to do this during the compiling of this presentation. For future research, I will be aware not to fall into these traps.
Reflecting upon this group work, I've become to realize that I get easily distracted, especially by my phone and social media in particular, and have difficulties remaining concentrated. This led to less focused reading or attention spans when listening to my peers, resulting in me giving less productive feedback to them. This also affects my private social interactions, as also study times and other modules. I have installed a time restriction on my phone, allowing only 1 hour of daily screen time for social media as an attempt to stay more focused when people are talking to me or I'm reading my own work. It is important to me to reduce this destructive behavior to build better peer relationships, being able to provide better feedback, become a better team element in future group work, and make my days more productive.